Oi, oi, it's St. George's Day. Get a round in, lads. Right, now we've got our round in. Let's toast to great St. George, the patron saint of England, and, like, who actually is St. George? Right, it's the 23rd of April, which means that in the great land of England, it is, in fact, St. George's Day. Now, there is actually, for once in my entire life, going to be a St. George's Day parade in Manchester, where I'm from. But it's one of the few times I've ever heard of any celebrations to St. George in the city of Manchester, at least, in my entire life. I mean, we always have celebrations for St. Patrick's Day, but I never really hear about any celebrations for St. George. And there's various reasons for this, which I will not go into here. But one of the reasons is that, like, nobody seems to actually know anything about St. George. Maybe at a stretch you might be able to come up with an image like this and say, yeah, I mean, something to do with a dragon, something to do with the white flag with a red cross, and that's about it. Something to do with the Crusades, I think. Let's dig in. So here's something that a lot of people do actually know these days, is the fact that St. George was not an Englishman and didn't talk like this, and definitely not from England's green and pleasant land. He was in fact thought to be from Turkey, and in his youth he moved with his mother and father to what is present-day Palestine. To be more precise, he lived in what is now current-day Tel Aviv. Now you know. Whenever you see depictions of St. George, he's usually dressed up in armour, and the reason for that is that he was actually a soldier. He was a soldier in the Emperor Diocletian's army, and he was such a good soldier that he actually advanced up to the level of colonel. He was pretty good at the art of warfare. Just as an aside, this lady's hairdo is quite interesting. I get distracted. What is the dragon in all of these paintings of St. George meant to represent? One of the interpretations is that the dragon represents the persecution of the Emperor Diocletian. So as I mentioned, St. George was a soldier in the army of the Emperor Diocletian. So we're talking around the year 300. So it's the late 200s, early 300s. St. George is one of Diocletian's star performers. So what happens? In about the year 299, the Emperor Diocletian decides that he doesn't want Christianity to spread any longer within his realm, and so he issues an edict, which is basically a law, saying that he doesn't want anyone to practice Christianity on pain of death. Things hadn't been going very well for the Emperor Diocletian, and, you know, we always look for scapegoats, and in this case the scapegoats were the Christians. In the year 303, the Emperor Diocletian issued this edict. He ordered the destruction of churches, the burning of sacred scriptures, and a ban on public worship. Coming soon to a town near you. Just kidding. For Christians who were in the military, they were expected to renounce their Christian faith. And anyone who refused to renounce their Christian faith, anyone who refused to offer sacrifices to the Roman gods, would be either thrown into prison or be executed. So obviously this was not an ideal situation for Georgie boy, who was a Christian soldier in the Emperor Diocletian's army. What would you do in a situation like that? Well, I don't know what I would do, but I know what St. George did. So St. George, clearly not a shy wallflower, went up to the Emperor Diocletian and, with a copy of the edict in his hand, and tore up the edict, saying that he would have to renounce his Christian faith. He tore it up in front of the very face of the Emperor Diocletian and said, I refuse to do this. I am a Christian soldier. I will not renounce my faith. Now, that's probably not a good idea if you're standing in front of the Emperor Diocletian, because he was renowned for being a total tyrant. In fact, St. George, chastised him. He gave him a right rollicking for being such a cruel man, and was just not having any. As you can imagine, St. George was immediately imprisoned. He was tortured like you wouldn't believe. They kept trying to get him to convert to paganism, to renounce his Christian faith, and he just would not do it, so the tortures just got worse and worse. He had heavy stone blocks placed on top of his chest, and Lord knows how he was not crushed to death, because that would have been the normal route, but he somehow survived that. Then he was tied to a spinning wheel that sliced his flesh with knives. Delightful. This is another strange hairdo. It's like he should be a member of a 1970s rock band. But anyway, sorry, St. George. When the Emperor Diocletian tried to break the spirit of St. George, tried to get him to renounce his faith one more time, and St. George responded like this. I despise your promises and do not fear your threats. The Emperor's power is of short duration and his reign will soon end. It is better for you to acknowledge the true God and to seek his kingdom. Any takers for anyone to go and say this to Keir Starmer? No? Well, the next day, St. George was led through the streets and then beheaded. His powerful witness and courage was said to convert many Roman pagans that day to Christianity. Ha! That's my boy. So St. George won his palm of martyrdom that way for being so courageous, and in fact his death was not an unusual one. There were many other saints that died under Roman persecutions and in many other persecutions throughout history in a similar way. Because he was a soldier within the army, within Diocletian's army, he became the patron saint of soldiers. Devotions to St. George gained in popularity in England during the First Crusades, and it was said that King Richard the Lionheart visited a church dedicated to St. George on his way to battle, and he prayed for his intercession and obviously was successful in battle and attributed his success to the intercession of St. George, which is why St. George is the patron saint of England. We have St. George's cross on our wonderful flag. It was King Edward III, 250 years after that First Crusade, that named St. George as the patron saint of good old England. Oh, there you have it. That is the reason why St. George is the patron saint of England. He's also the patron saint of, I believe it's 12 other countries that celebrate various different dates. But today, 23rd of April, it is the feast day of the patron saint of good old England. And so, yeah, have your pint, raise a glass to him, but also remember that we have a great saint to defend us. I'm not getting on my soapbox about this, but I do believe that one of the most important lessons we can gain from St. George's life is that we should never compromise our Christian faith or kowtow to corrupt governments or corrupt leaders. The most important thing, our Christian identities. We should not sacrifice our Christian identities on the altar of success and of temporary success in this world, nor for power, nor for money, nor for leadership. Integrity is everything, and so is our faith in Jesus Christ and our Christian identity. St. George, patron saint of England, slay the dragons of our time and pray for us.